r/Credit, what paranormal activities have you witnessed? 1. Lights turning off/on. Items flying off of shelves/counters. One time when I was home at night by myself, I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. I looked over and the bottom of one half of my scarf that I had draped over the top of my bathroom door was suspended at a 20-degree angle, including the tassels and midair. At this point, so many things were happening in my apartment, including physical welts down my back, that I was terrified to be in it. I ended up getting dressed and going outside the building before I broke down crying and called my grandma to come pick me up. A different time, my friend and I were outside the building smoking when we heard what sounded like someone thrashing my apartment. I'm talking chairs being smashed into walls, shelves being tipped over. I was the only person living in the building at the time. We raced upstairs to catch whoever it was, but not a single thing was moved in my apartment and all the other units were locked. I checked. I never saw ghost, apparition, shadow, etc. When we first moved in, everyone hated coming into our building. They said it felt off. My ex and I never felt that way at first and thought everyone was exaggerating. By the time I moved, I wouldn't speak about ghosts or watch anything remotely paranormal in my apartment. Eventually, I watched the paranormal activities at a friend's and cannot describe the chill I felt. Similar things were happening in my own home. Haven't experienced anything like it since I moved. 2. I went with my best friend during high school for summer vacation to his grandparents who live in the countryside in Japan. I stayed in his mom's old room, which has a small wall closet. Just above this closet was a smaller closet door, like 1.5 feet tall and about 3 feet wide, just above it. Weird design, but their house is old. The first couple weeks, I was pretty jet-lagged and Japan is hot and humid, so I didn't really sleep at night. If my light was off at night though, I always felt uneasy about that small closet space. Something about it just felt darker than the rest of the room. Toward the end of the second week, I started to adjust to the time difference. One morning, I woke up and that small door was open. It was unsettling, but I closed it and just thought maybe it wasn't closed all the way and came loose. A couple nights later, I woke up feeling uneasy. It was dark and I could kinda see, and I could see that small door was open. It was much darker than the rest of the room, like black, pitch dark. This was the first and only time I experienced paralysis. I was too scared to move, say, or do anything. I just felt this darkness coming from there. I don't remember sleeping that night, but I must have because I remember waking up the next morning. I told my friend about it, who said his mom told him about something like that, too. When we got back home and I talked to his parents, his mom kinda joked with me, "So, I heard you met the ghost." 3. While I was in high school, my parents worked shift work at a hospital, and occasionally that would mean I'd be left at home alone at night with my dog. On this particular night, it was around 10 p.m. My dad had left for work in the afternoon, and my mom was getting ready to leave, so I was going to be alone for a few hours until he came home. My mom was getting ready to leave through the front door when she noticed there was a small pile of t-shirts on the floor near the stairs to the second floor. My dog liked to lie down on them. She said, "Make sure you put these in the laundry hamper," which was upstairs in their bedroom. I said sure, bent down to pick them up and threw them upstairs, and they landed in the upstairs hallway, so I could pick it up from there when I went upstairs. I turned around and my mom was saying bye to our dog and giving him a few back rubs before she left. I waved at my mom as she closed the door, then called my dog to come upstairs as I got ready for bed. We walked up the stairs together, and when I got to the top I noticed that the laundry wasn't in the hallway. I checked my bedroom, which was right next to where I thought I had thrown them, and it wasn't there either. I walked down the rest of our upstairs hallway and into my parents' room, and there was the laundry sitting in the middle of their floor. With the layout of my parents' house, there's literally no way my throw could have landed as far and into their bedroom, perpendicular to the direction I threw it. And neither me or my dog had touched them after I threw them up. I got serious goosebumps when I saw that, and then reached down to pick up the pile of clothes. When I picked it off the floor, I noticed that underneath the pile was a burn mark on the carpet, slightly larger than a quarter, as if something hot had settled there and made an indent. There was no smoke or smell, and looked like it had been there for a long time. I never saw that burn mark before, and I used to go in there every day to put my own clothes in the hamper. I quickly got ready for bed and tried to go to sleep and not think about what just happened. Still don't have any explanation to that, and I think about it every so often. 4. My brother was on the phone once with his GF when she started saying that she could hear some old lady asking my brother for a glass of water. There was nobody around him, so he ignored it, but she kept on insisting. He hung up the phone and went to check on our grandma, who was in her bedroom, and found her dead. Fast forward a couple of years, around 11 p.m., I was on the phone with a girl when I saw a guy on a bicycle go past. Phone was by the windowsill. Same spot as my brother. That's when I noticed she stopped talking and asked her if she was still there. She apologized as she thought I got into trouble. I said no and asked why she said that, and she replied with, "Someone was telling me to stop talking on the phone, it's late. Go to bed." I was on my own, everybody in the house was already asleep. I asked her if it was an old lady and she said yes. Told her it's my grandma and that the same thing happened to my brother. She started talking about ghosts and stuff, so I told her I'm hanging up and bolted into my room. 5. When I was 6, I slept on a bunk bed in a room alone. The bottom bunk was empty, was meant for my younger brother, but he was too scared of sleeping in a bed alone. So I was alone in that room that night. I remember a chilling feeling that night, then it suddenly got really warm, probably because I was undergoing a night terror of some sort. Then I start breathing heavily and open my eyes and see the room is empty. My little night light in the corner of the room comforts me back to sleep, except as I closed my eyes I felt a heavy hand petting my shoulder. My eyes rip open and there was no one in the room. As soon as I lay back down, the petting continued and I covered my head, just pretending to myself that it was my mom. It took me 12 years to stop sleeping with my head under the covers because of that memory. My mom, of course, knew a woman passed away in that apartment before we moved in, so she always believed it was that woman trying to comfort me. 6. My parents had flown to Houston when I was 11 years old to see a specialist for my dad's lymphoma. It had just returned from remission, but there was no reason to think he was in any imminent danger. I was riding my bike home the day they were to fly back and stopped my bike in this ditch we used to ride down/up on our way back. When I got to the top, I felt a wave of emotion come over me, and without even knowing what I was saying, I told my friend I was riding with that my dad had just died. My friend was like, "What?" I just knew. I rode the rest of the way home to find my grandparents, my dad's parents, bawling on our back porch. I stood there watching them in the doorway for a few minutes, unable to walk out to talk to them. He had died an hour before I got home from school. No phone calls to the school, nor did I interact with anyone that knew prior to riding in the ditch. I just knew when that wave came over me. Again, there was no reason to think he was even remotely close to passing. He had caught pneumonia while in Houston and died from that. 7. Late one weekend night, my parents were out at a party, so it was just my sister and I home. I heard my parents come home, so like a kid I instantly shut off all my video games and pretended to be asleep. As a kid, I always went to bed with the little lamp on. I hopped in bed and pretended to be asleep when I heard someone enter my room and head for the light on my dresser. Their back was to me, and I saw they were reaching for my lamp to turn it off. Just as I had that thought, they turned around and looked directly at me and stared for what felt like forever. I couldn't see much detail. I was peeking through my closed eyes as discreetly as I could, other than a large old-timey looking brown dress, like Victorian era, and what looked like the face of an old woman with where their eyes were. It was very dark and I couldn't make out any details. I saw them smile at me and then shut the light off before I fell asleep. The next morning at breakfast, my parents said they were surprised that I fell asleep with the light off, since normally I left it on. I asked everybody in the house if they did it, and no luck. I have no idea how to explain it to this day. What's even more bizarre is recently I found a picture of my great-grandmother who died of old age some 40 years before I was born. She was wearing a dark Victorian-style dress in the image. 8. I was in art class when I was 15 and a random teacher's aide, lady in her 60s unassuming Nana type, sat down next to me and said that she had a vision about my job as an adult. I was like, oh, am I a photographer? She said no. I was fairly dismissive and skeptical because I was certain that's what I'd be doing, but I said, oh, you tell me what you saw? She then went on to describe my job. None of it made much sense at the time, and you could tell she didn't quite understand what she saw. She said she couldn't figure out where I was because the place had no windows and everything was a pastel green color. She said I was making something that looked like CD covers, but they weren't that. She went on to explain that I was working with a bunch of guys and some of them were helping/teaching me to do my job. But the thing that really stuck out was she just keeps seeing me do this thing where I look at whatever it was I was making and then I would change the angle of it. She mimicked what I was doing. Anyway, about 8 years later, I ended up doing exactly all the things she said I was doing. I was a wine label flexographic printer. It got to me so bad that my future was set in stone that I eventually quit my job to pursue a fine art photography career. That was a few years back now. I'm about to have my second solo exhibition opening this weekend. What I still haven't figured out yet was, have I broken the timeline, or was I just meant to have had my future told and pursue a different career? It's all pretty out there and I'm not too sure what to make of it, cause I'm not the type of person to believe in that sort of stuff. But like, it happens, so there are people that can see into the future and they are 100% right. 9. When I was a kid, me, my friend, and our mothers were playing a board game at my summer cottage on a super foggy evening. An old man in flannel came from our back porch, there was only woodland behind us, and came up to the screen door asking if anyone had seen his wife, who was very late coming home. We unfortunately hadn't seen anyone, and he gave some pleasant thanks anyway, farewells, and walked through our living area, out the front door. A few seconds later, our mom said, "Why don't you two get some flashlights and help the man?" 15 seconds later, we were out the door, looking for him, and he was just gone. We both went up and down the street, and the guy was nowhere to be found. 10. My family and I used to stay in a very affordable beach cottage in the Outer Banks, NC, for a few weeks each summer. It was a converted life-saving station, with a lookout tower and everything. I was just a kid, 13 or 14, when we first started staying there. I used to walk around and talk to the local kids. They were shocked that I was staying there. I didn't believe them because kids are gonna be kids, and I figured they were just trying to scare me. I was wrong. The first few nights were quiet, but every night after that something would happen. My aunt claimed that her bed raised off the floor and shook violently, knocking her to the floor. She slept in the car for the remainder of our vacation. I'm a bratty kid and just figured she was drunk. I stayed upstairs in the room where they used to keep rescued and dying sailors. I woke up one morning to such loud banging in my room. I was terrified. Nobody was there. One of the beds had overturned while I was sleeping. The next night, I woke up to more banging and loud laughter from the tower. I figured it was my sister on the phone, but nobody was there. As the days went on, I felt like somebody was watching me anytime I showered or used the upstairs bathroom. The banging in the tower was nightly at this point, and I was absolutely terrified. One morning I had slept in, being a teenager at all, and woke up to my relatives trying to get into the house after a morning at the beach. Every single door in the entire house was deadlocked from the inside. Very odd. We spent a few more summers there, each time the same experience. Eventually the house washed away during a hurricane, leaving only the tower behind on the beach. It's a shame, because I'd love to stay there as an adult and see. 11. One weekend, I was at my dad's house. He'd come to the upstairs bathroom to get a shave and heard footsteps in my stepsister's room. I thought it was him walking around initially, so I got up to find him standing at her closed door. He looks back at me and whispers, "You can hear that too, right?" I nodded and he opened the door slowly. My stepsister was asleep and never had been awake apparently. There was no way she could have crossed the room, gotten in bed, and pretended to be that convincingly asleep in the 2 seconds it took my dad to open the door. He went in, checked her TV, which had never been on. She had one of those big ones from the 90s that would get warm when turned on. The radio hadn't been on either. Figured maybe it was the beat of a song or something. After that, we heard the footsteps a bunch of times, usually very early in the morning. Some of the footsteps were so heavy, they'd shake the ceiling fan of the dining room directly under her bedroom, and they'd woken her up a few times as well. Whenever I'd shower at my dad's, I always felt like someone was standing behind me. Eventually, I got so stressed and paranoid that I refused to shower at the house or even go into the upstairs bathroom. My dad asked me one day, "Do you ever feel like someone's in the shower with you when you're here?" After months of me feeling that way and never mentioning it to anyone. 12. At my mom's old apartment, I used to have this feeling I was always being watched. Then I was starting to wake up at 3 a.m. consistently. On one of the nights I had woken up, I heard someone call out my name. It was a woman's voice, but I didn't recognize it. She kept calling out my name and walking towards my bed, getting closer, but I didn't see anything. I freaked out, jumped off my bed, and ran into my brother's room. I hopped into bed with him and tried waking him up. The punk sleeps like the dead, he still sleeps like that. I heard her footsteps follow me until his doorway. After that, every time I woke up in the middle of the night, I just ran into his room and slept on the top bunk. We had bunk beds. My mother still doesn't believe that happened. Thankfully, we only lived there for a couple of months, then moved out. 13. Attended a school back in 2013 to 2014 that was so haunted I still don't believe it. Me and many other students, but also some of the teachers working there, saw things go flying in the air, heard footsteps, were sometimes touched by something we couldn't see, and had various new and expensive equipment. Myself, I had an iPhone 5 and a fully spec'd late 2012 iMac at the time, fail whenever the ghost entered the room we were in, and so on. The various tech problems all disappeared as soon as I left the school and took my stuff back home with me. BTW. The iMac's still in use today by my uncle, and he experiences no issues with it to this date. So to my first serious experience at the school, one night I was alone with a girl at my student house. Everyone else was partying down at the school building when suddenly we started hearing footsteps from the attic upstairs. It was a tiny room up there that was only big enough for storing some tour and hiking equipment, like a few backpacks and such. After maybe half a minute or so, the footsteps started coming down the stairs from the attic. At this point, me and my friend went dead silent, and we were both just staring towards the door that went to the attic. The footsteps came all the way down and went into the living room where we were sitting. At this point, the sound of the footsteps switched from sounding like someone walking around in big boots into what to me sounded more like someone coming wet and barefoot out of the shower/tub. When the sound got to the middle of the room, which was right in front of where me and this girl were sitting, it stopped, and for a few brief moments, there was nothing but dead silence. The girl and I just looked at each other for like 5 to 10 seconds before my eyes caught something going on behind the girl's back. We were sitting in a couch together, and behind her were these huge windows that went from the floor and all the way up to the ceiling. They had some seriously huge blinds as well, and so I watched this pretty heavy lead thing that certain industrial blinds have be lifted all the way up from the floor to just above the middle of the window. There it kept floating in the air for about 5 seconds before it was punched into the window with such force that I'm sure the window would have broke if it hadn't been for those thick blinds protecting it. The girl didn't see this as it happened behind her back, but you can be sure that she heard the noise. In fact, she got so scared that she literally jumped into my lap screaming. That's the moment when I stopped trying to give possible natural explanations to everything paranormal. 14. I was living in an apartment with 3 roommates at the time. I was 19 and working all sorts of weird hours. As usual, I would stay up late most nights. Our apartment had 2 hallways that formed in capital L. My room is at the top of the L, The bathroom was in the corner of where the lines meet, with the door being in the inside middle of the small section. In the outside corner was the living room. My roommate had his bedroom at the end of the little part of the L. I walked out of my room to go to the bathroom. No need to turn the light on, as this was a trick I had made hundreds of times before. As I left the bathroom, I turned to go back to my room. Just as I turned off the lights of the bathroom, there, standing where the short hallway and the living room met, there was a teenage girl standing there, wearing a white flowery dress, just smiling. She didn't look evil, just a normal person standing there smiling at me. I freaked the fuck out and went running for my room. About 20 minutes later, I finally came out of my room, turning all the lights on as I went through the apartment. She was nowhere to be seen. However, where I saw her standing was noticeably colder than the rest of the apartment should have been for an August evening.